A pleasant evening to all. My name is April Rose Tanchado Bucalid. Let me present to you my topic on learning and teaching different types of grammar. This report is based on the electronic book titled Second Language Learning and Language Teaching by Vivian Cook. I'm going to talk about what grammar is and its different types. 2. Structure words, morphemes, and sequences of acquisition. 3. The processability model. 4. Principles and parameter of grammar. 5. L2 or second language learning of grammar and L2 teaching. And 6. The role of explicit grammar in language teaching. The second and the rest of these topics are based on some grammatical research on second language learning. First is about grammar. The discussion will be focused on the following questions. What is grammar? How do you think it is learned? How would you teach it? So what is grammar? A language has patterns and regularities that are used to convey meaning, some of which make up its grammar. One important aspect of grammar in most languages is the order of words, which is part of syntax. Any speaker of English knows that Mr. Bean loves Teddy does not have the same meaning as Teddy loves Mr. Bean. Another aspect of grammar consists of changes in the forms of words, part of morphology, more important in some languages than others. This bush flowered in May means something different from these bushes flowered in May because of the differences between this and these bush and bushes flowered and flower. Chomsky calls grammar the computational system of human language that relates sounds and meaning. Trivial in itself, but impossible to manage without. Grammar is the aspect of language that is most unique, having features that do not occur in other mental processes and that are not apparently found in animal languages. Grammar is learned in different ways from anything else that people learn. In some ways, as grammar is highly systematic, its effects are usually fairly obvious and frequent in people's speech or writing. One reason why so much SLA research has concentrated on grammar. So what are the types of grammar? Grammar can be prescriptive grammar, a way of telling people what they ought to say rather than reporting what they do say. It is the grammar that prescribes what people should or shouldn't say. You should not split the infinitive to boldly go, for example. Second is traditional grammar, a system for describing sentence structure used in English schools for centuries based on grammars of classical languages such as Latin. The school grammar largely concerned with labeling sentences with parts of speech, such as nouns, verbs, etc. Third is structural grammar, a system for describing sentences based on the idea of smaller structures. This is the grammar concerned with how words go into phrases into sentences. The last is linguistic or grammatical competence. This is the knowledge of the structural regularities of language in the minds of speakers. This is the knowledge of structures or rules, etc., stored in a person's mind. These are the examples of prescriptive grammar. Don't use a double negative, such as I didn't go nowhere. Don't end a sentence in a preposition. Who did you give the candy bar to? Don't split infinitives. To boldly go where no one has gone before. Don't start a sentence with a conjunction. So you have to be careful. Do not use ain't. For example, I ain't going. Let us explain deeper. One familiar type of grammar is the rules found in school books. This is called prescriptive grammar because it prescribes what people ought to do rather than describes what they actually do. It is the highway code through which the government tells us how to drive rather than observing what we actually do on the road. Prescriptive grammar is all but irrelevant to the language teaching classroom. Since the 1960s, people have believed that you should teach the language as it is, not as it ought to be. Descriptively, not prescriptively. Students should learn to speak real language that people actually use, not an artificial ideal form that nobody uses. One idea or area where prescriptive grammar does still thrive in spelling is punctuation. Another is word processing, which warns us if we commit a mistake. The third is journal editors. The second type is traditional grammar, which concerns the parts of speech. While the parts of speech are indeed relevant to grammar, there are many other powerful grammatical concepts that are equally important. A useful modern source is the online NASA manual, which provides sensible practical advice in largely traditional terms such as the subject and verb should be the most important elements of a sentence. Too many modifiers, particularly between the subject and the verb, can overpower these elements. Flowers, singular and plural. It has a display of singular and plural forms. Flower and versus sunflowers. List of idiosyncratic spellings of plurals, such as babies and shelves, words that are unexpectedly plural, such as scissors, and plurals that not in S, such as mice. It explains that plural of a noun is usually with S. In other words, it assumes that students know what the term plural means, presumably because it will translate into all languages. The third type is the structural grammar. Language teaching has also made use of structural grammar based on the concept of phrase structure, which shows how some words go together in a sentence and some do not. In a sentence such as "the man fed the dog," the word "the" seems somehow to go with "man," but "fed" does not seem to go with "dog." This phrase structure is usually presented in tree diagrams that show how words build up into phrases and phrases build up into sentences. Structural grammar thus describes how the elements of the sentence fit together in an overall structure, built up from larger and larger structures. The important thing is not so much the meaning of the sentence as how it is constructed. Hence, structural grammars define nouns and other parts of speech in terms of how they behave in structures. A noun is a word that reflects for plural beer, that can be modified by an adjective good beer, and that can be the subject of a sentence. Good beer comes from the noun. Teachers have been displaying structural grammar in substitution tables since at least the 1920s. These represent the same information as the phrase structure tree but with some alternative vocabulary items specified. A typical example can be seen in the Sartre course book Speak Out, just like this one. These graphic displays of grammar are still common in present-day course books and grammar books. The implication is that sentences are constructed by making choices from left to right, and indeed, they were often used as a way of getting students to make up sentences in this fashion. Structural drills and pattern practice draw on similar ideas of structure, as in the following. You can go and see him. Well, if I go, he can come and ask you. Well, if he comes, They can write and tell her. The students replace the verb each time within the structure well, if, pronoun, verb. Dining in the present tense for possible conditions. The last type is the linguistic or grammatical competence. SLA research relies mainly on another meaning of grammar, which is the knowledge of language that the speaker possesses in the mind, known as linguistic or grammatical competence, originally taken from Chomsky's work of the 1960s. The grammatical competence, I mean the cognitive state that encompasses all those aspects of form and meaning and their relation, including underlying structures that enter into the relation, which are properly assigned to the specific subsystem of the human mind that relates representations of form and meaning. It is according to Noam Chomsky. All speakers know the grammar of their language as a mental state without having to study it. The speaker of English knows there is something wrong with "is John is the man" the French without looking it up in any book. A native speaker knows the system of the language. He or she may not be able to verbalize this knowledge clearly. It is implicit knowledge below the level of consciousness. Nevertheless, no one could produce a single sentence of English without having the mental grammar of English present in their minds. If we ask someone how to make a ribbon, everyone knows how to make a ribbon, but is unable to describe the actions, right? There is one type of knowledge in our minds which we can talk about consciously, another which is far from conscious. We can all make ribbons or produce a sentence in our first language. Few of us can describe how we do it. This view of grammar as knowledge treats it as something stored unconsciously in the mind, the native speaker's competence. As well as grammar, native speakers also possess knowledge of how language is used. This is often called communicative competence by those who see the public functions of language as crucial rather than the private ways we use language inside our minds. Sheer knowledge of language has little point if speakers cannot use it appropriately for all the activities in which they want to take part, such as complaining, arguing, persuading, declaring war, writing love letters, buying season tickets, and so on. Many linguists see language as having private functions as well as public. Language for dreaming or planning a day out. Hence, the more general term pragmatic competence reflects all the possible uses of language rather than restricting them to communication, such as praying, mental arithmetic, keeping a diary, making a shopping list, and many others. This shows the typical grammatical elements in beginners' English course books. This gives some idea of the type of structure that are taught to beginners in most of the classrooms around the world. The grammar is a typical medley of traditional and structural items. Many of these items are the basis for language teaching and for SLA research. 1. Present of to be, such as it's in Japan, I'm Mark. He's Jack Kennedy's nephew. Second, articles A and An. I'm a student. She is an old woman. Is an exciting place. Subject pronouns. She is Italian. I've got 2 brothers and a sister. Do you have black or white coffee? In, from, with places. You ask a woman in the street at a time. I'm from India. She lives in London. And the last is noun plurals, such as boys, parents, sandwiches. Now let's proceed with the second part of this topic, structure words, morphemes, and sequences of acquisition. An important distinction for language teaching has been between content words and structure words, also known as function words. Content words have meanings that can be looked up in a dictionary, and they are numbered in many thousands. Structure words, on the other hand, are limited in number, consisting of words like the, to, and yet. Structure words are described best in grammar books rather than dictionaries. The meaning of the or of depends on the grammatical rules of the language, not on dictionary definitions. It is virtually impossible to invent a new structure word because this would mean changing the grammatical rules of the language. This shows the main differences between content and structure words. Other differences are, for content words, they are used more in written language, are more likely to be preceded by a pause in speech, consist of nouns such as glass, verbs move, adjectives glossy, etc. Are always pronounced and spelled the same, such as look, have a fixed stress or stresses, such as pilot, have more than two letters, I or N, are pronounced with an initial voiceless th, theory. New ones can always be invented, such as cyberpunk. For structured words, they are used more in spoken language, are less likely to be preceded by a pause in speech, consist of prepositions to, articles a, pronouns he, etc. Vary in pronunciation for emphasis, such as have, for have, are stressed for emphasis, etc. The can consist of one or two letters, I, N, are pronounced with an initial voice the, there. New ones are almost never invented. As well as words, most linguist grammar rely on a unit called the morpheme, defined as the smallest element in grammar that has meaning. Some words consist of a single morpheme, such as to, book, like, or black. Some words can have inflections added to show their grammatical role in the sentence. Say books, book plus S, or blacker, black plus ER. Others can be split up into several morphemes. Mini supermarket might be mini supermarket. Hamburger is seen as hamburger made of ham rather than Hamburg with ER, person from Hamburg. How grammatical morphemes were learned by second language learners. In some SLA research, grammatical morphemes or inflections like ing or ing are grouped together with structured words like to as grammatical morphemes. In the Lai and Burt study, they decided to see how these grammatical morphemes were learned by second language learners. They made Spanish-speaking children learning English describe pictures and checked how often they supplied a grammatical morphemes in the appropriate cases in the sentence. Suppose that at the low level, second language learners say sentences with two content words like girl, go. So this is the result. One is for plural S. This is the easiest morpheme for them. Example, girls go. 2. Progressive with ing. Next easiest word. Ending ing in present continuous forms like going, girls going. 3. Copula forms of be. Example, as a main verb in a sentence, John is happy rather than as an auxiliary used with another verb. John is going. Changing the sentence slightly gets girls are here. 4. After this came the auxiliary forms of be with ing, yielding girls are going. 5. Definite and indefinite definite articles the and a. Next in difficulty came the articles, enabling the learners to produce the girls go or a girl go. 6. Next were the irregular English past tenses such as came and went. Those verbs that do not have an id ending pronounced in the usual three ways ted or id, played, learned, and waited, as in the girls went. 7. Next came the third person s used with present tense verbs, as in the girl goes. The last is, which is the most difficult of the 8 endings, was the s ending used with nouns to show possession, as in the girl's book. The sequence from 1 to 8 mirrors the order of difficulty for the second language learners Dulai and Bert studied. They had least difficulty with plural S and most difficulty with possessive S. One interesting discovery was the similarities between the L2 learners. It was not just Spanish-speaking children who have a sequence of difficulty for the 8 grammatical morphemes. Similar orders have been found for Japanese children and for Korean adults. In a project which investigated the acquisition of 5 second languages by adult migrant workers in Europe, researchers found a basic grammar that all L2 learners shared, which had 3 simple rules. A sentence may consist of a noun phrase followed by a verb optionally followed by another noun phrase, girl take bread. A noun phrase followed by a copula and another NP or noun or an adjective, it's bread. Third, a verb followed by a noun phrase pinching, it's the NP for a noun phrase. So what are the key points here in the early acquisition of L2 grammar? Content and structure words differ in many ways, including the ways they are used in sentences and how they are pronounced. Grammatical morphemes, structure, words, and grammatical inflections are learned in a particular sequence in L2 acquisition. L2 learners acquire the same basic grammar virtually regardless of the first and second languages involved. Let's proceed with processability. It is first called the multidimensional model. Believe that the explanation for sequences must lie in the expanding capacity of the learner's mind to handle the grammar of L2 sentences. The core idea was that some sentences are formed by moving elements from one position to another. Keyword here for processability means sequences of acquisition may reflect the issue, which certain structures can be processed by the mind. Grammatical structures. The complexity of L2 grammatical structures the mind can handle depends on the amount of memory available. In forming English questions, move the auxiliary or the question word to the beginning of the sentence. So John is nice becomes is John nice by moving is to the beginning. John is where becomes where is John by moving first where then is, and John will go where becomes where will John go by moving both where and will in front of John. The multi-dimensional model sees syntactic movement as the key element in understanding the learning process sequence, and movement clearly makes demands on the student's memory processes. The learner starts with sentences without movement and learns how to move the various parts of the sentence around to get the final form. The learner climbs a structural tree like from the bottom to top, first learning to deal with words, next with phrases, then with simple sentences. Finally, with subordinate clauses and complex sentences. Stage 1. Learners can produce only one sound or one word at a time, say ticket or beer, or formulas such as what's the time. At this stage, the learners know content words but have no idea of grammatical structure. The words come out in a stream without being put in phrases and without grammatical morphemes. Stage 2. Learners acquire the typical word order of the language. In both English and German, we use a subject-verb-object order. John likes beer. Now the learners start to move elements at the beginning of the sentence, so they put adverbials at the beginning. On Tuesday, I went to London. Stage 4. Learners discover how the preposition can be separated from its phrase in English. The patient he looked after rather than the patient after which he looked. They also start to use the ing ending. I'm reading a good book. Stage 5. Next come question words, questions such as where is he going to be? The third person grammatical morpheme S, he likes and the dative with to, he gave his name to the receptionist. The last stage, learners acquire the order of subordinate clauses. The question order is will he go, but the reported question is Jane asked if he would go. Now Jane asked if would he go. On this stage includes structures such as he gave me the book, where the indirect object precedes the direct object as opposed to he gave the book to me with a reverse order. Processability model is a development of the multidimensional model. It explains these sequences in terms of the grammatical processes involved in the production of a sentence, which are roughly as follows. The learner gets access to individual content words see, car. The learner gets access to grammatical structure words see, the car, called the category procedure. The third is the phrasal procedure. The learner assembles this in phrases he sees the car. S procedure. The learner puts the phrases together within the sentence. He will see the car. And the last is the subordinate clause procedure. The learner can work with both main clauses and subordinate clauses. If he looks out of the window, he will see the car. This processability model leads to the teachability hypothesis, which believes that an L2 structure can be learned on instruction only if the learner's interlanguage is close to the point when this structure is acquired in a natural setting. So teachers should teach according to the stage that their students are at. To take some examples from the above sequence, do not teach the third person as ending of present tense verbs in he likes at early stages as it inevitably comes late. In the early stages, concentrate on the main word order of the subject verb object. Cats like milk, and do not expect learners to learn the word order of questions. What do cats like? Etc. until much later. Introduce sentence initial adverbials. In summer, I played tennis as a way into the movement involved in questions. Do you like browns? These are three possible suggestions out of the many that arise from the research. They can fit with the sequence in which the grammatical points are usually introduced in textbooks. Key points on processability. Learners acquire a second language in a sequence of 6 grammatical stages. These stages relate to the learner's growing ability to process language in their minds. Sequences of teaching currently do not fit these 6 stages and may place undue demands on learners. Let's proceed with the principles and parameters of grammar. Language faculty built into the human mind consisting of principles and parameters is what universal grammar tackles. Universal grammar theory is associated with Noam Chomsky. It sees the knowledge of grammar in the mind as made of two components: principles that all languages have in common and parameters in which they vary. All human minds are believed to honor the common principles that are forced on them by the nature of the human minds that all their speakers share. They differ over the settings for the parameters for particular languages. One principle that has been proposed is called locality. It is the movement in the structure of the sentence has to be local. Local here means within the area of structure rather than across areas of structure that span the whole sentence. For example, we're going to make or construct a sentence or a question like this: I saw the cat that is black. How would you explain it to your students? It presupposes that learners know the structure of the sentence. Locality principle is built into the human mind. The reason why we find it so obvious that is the cat that black is ungrammatical is because our minds work in a particular way. We literally can't conceive of a sentence that works differently. This approach to grammar affects the nature of interlanguage, the knowledge of a second language in the learner's mind. The pro-drop parameter, known as the null subject parameter, is an example of a parameter. It's the presence of the grammatical subject in a declarative sentence. In German, it is possible to say spricht, but impossible to say spricht or speaks. The same is true for French, for English, and for a great many languages. Declarative sentences must have subjects. But in Italian, while it is possible to say il parla, he talks, it is far more usual to say parla or talks without an expressed subject. The same is true in Arabic and Chinese and many other languages. Declarative sentences are not required to have subjects. This form of grammar is its close link to language acquisition. It provides a framework within which all languages can be compared. L2 learning of principles and parameters of grammar. These are the key takeaways. L2 learners do not need to learn principles of universal grammar as they will use them automatically. L2 learners need to acquire new parameter settings for parameters such as pro-drop, often starting from their first language. All L2 learners can be looked at within the same overall framework of grammar as it applies to all languages. L2 learning of grammar and L2 teaching. Grammar is also relevant to the sequence in which elements of language are taught. Of necessity, language teaching has to present the various aspects of language in order rather than introduce them all simultaneously. The conventional solution used to be to sequence the grammar in terms of increasing complexity of verb forms. Say teaching the present simple first, he cooks, and the past perfect continuous passive last has been being cooked, because the former is much simpler than the latter. So this gives the teaching sequence for grammatical items. This is a typical of the sequences that have been developed for EFL teaching over the past 100 years, based chiefly on the tense system. But has then been shown to be successful in practice, it has no particular justification from SLA research. 1. The present tense forms. 2. Present simple. 3. Past simple regular. 4. Past simple irregular. 5. I like plus ing form. 6. Can and can't. 7. Be going to. There are definite orders for learning language, particularly for grammar. That's why alternative ways of using L2 sequences in language teaching are given. You can ignore the parts of grammar that have particular L2 learning sequence as the learner will follow these automatically anyway. Follow the L2 learning order as closely as possible in the teaching. Teach last things in an L2 learning sequence first, and ignore grammar altogether. The last topic is the role of explicit grammar in language teaching. Explicit grammar teaching involves the traditional or structural grammar. The use of explicit explanation implies that L2 learning is different from L1 learning. The main issue here is the connection between conscious understanding of a rule and the ability to use it. Grammatical explanation is far a way of teaching facts about the language. It is to say, a form of linguistics. If the aim of teaching is academic knowledge of language, conscious understanding is acceptable as a form of L2 learning. The students who want to use the language need to transform this academic knowledge into the ability to use it. Grammatical explanation in the classroom has then relied on the assumption that rules that are learned consciously can be converted into unconscious processes of comprehension and production. Some language teaching uses type of grammar resembling a sophisticated form of traditional grammar. Grammar books for language teaching often present grammar through a series of visual displays and examples. An example is the Stoward Essential Grammar in use by Murphy. A typical unit is headed Flower and raising awareness of language in general helps second language learning. Eric Hawkins suggested that the learner's general awareness of language should be raised before they start learning the L2, partly through grammar. He advocates an exploratory approach in which the pupils investigate grammar. They invent their own labels for grammar rather than being taught an established system. Grammar is approached as a voyage of discovery into the patterns of the language rather than the learning of prescriptive rules. It is not the teaching of particular points of grammar that matters, but the overall increase in the pupil's language sensitivity. Focus on form means discussion of grammar and vocabulary arising from meaningful language in the classroom. Focus on form contributes to the student's learning. According to Mike Long, focus on form overtly draws students' attention to linguistic elements as they arise incidentally in lessons whose overriding focus is on meaning or communication. Grammatical items or structures may be brought to the student's attention by some graphic or auditory device, stressing all the grammatical morphemes in speech to draw attention to them. These are the key points. Teachers have to be aware of the many ways in which grammar comes into language learning and use, and the many types of grammar that exist in choosing which grammar to teach and how to teach it. L2 learners go through distinct stages of acquisition for reasons still only partially understood. Teaching can utilize the known facts about these stages in several ways. Many aspects of grammar do not need to be taught as they are already present in the learner's mind and need instead to be activated. Conscious explanation of the L2 grammar is seen as beneficial in some circumstances as its raising of language awareness. This ends my topic.